Chapter 18. A Princely Reward. Ruby awoke to something touching her leg. She blinked her green eyes open to see a red-haired man stroking the inside of her thigh. Screaming, she recoiled away from him, scurrying over to the edge of the bed, almost falling out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she yelled, repulsed by his actions. The short, red-haired man looked back at her in surprise, a youthful face suggesting a similar age to her own. He held an air of superiority as he regarded her, red eyes studying her, past a long nose. "You speak the common tongue?" he said in a shrill voice. "You have a mind link, do you not?" "I do," shot back Ruby. "What does that have anything to do with it?" "Most of my prospects can only communicate via mind link. It is a rare treat to orally converse," his suggestive words making Ruby's skin crawl. "What do you mean, your prospects? Who the hell are you, and how did you get in here?" she shouted. "Such fire," the young man said with a grin. "I can see why father wanted you to attend the event. You ought to know me, and I can go anywhere I like," he said arrogantly, "and I do what I want with all my prospects." He lunged at her, his hands reaching for her private parts. Ruby saw him coming and collected her clenched fists into his long nose, a loud crack emanating and a yowl of pain as blood poured across the bedsheets. The young man fell off from the side of the bed and writhed on the floor, wailing like a wounded animal. Ruby drew the sheets up around her, her knuckles and fingers clenched tightly, throbbing in pain. "You filthy animal!" he swore at her, bolting upright. "You broke my nose, you fucking bitch!" Tears and blood streaming down his face. He dashed out of the room, calling for help in the distance. She lay there a moment, scarcely believing what had happened, when the procession of red title soldiers flooded into her room, red swords and whips brandished against her. The red-haired man entered last and shrieked, "She attacked me! Titles, bring me her head!" The titles advanced towards her, their masked faces emotionless as they surrounded her bed, preventing her escape. Ruby pressed herself against the red velvet bedhead, the weapons of the titles menacing and crackling with fire. She braced herself for the attack, ready to go down fighting, yet nothing happened. "Titles, I gave you an order!" screamed the man, still clutching his nose. Ruby saw a figure enter the room, tall and broad, unbeknown to the red-haired young man. The titles all pivoted in place and faced the doorway and knelt. "What are you all doing?" exclaimed the bloody-nosed man. "I told you to kill her." "Why would they do such a thing, my son?" said King Amaranth, making the prince yelp in surprise and wheel around to face him. "For father," stammered the prince. "She attacked me. I was defending myself." Amaranth moved his eyes between his son and then to Ruby and back again. "You need titles to defend you from a woman lying in bed?" he asked with a hint of laughter in his voice. "She struck me," he said, face flushing with embarrassment. "It's a crime to attack a member of the royal family." Amaranth turned once more to Ruby. "What did Prince Garnet do to deserve his broken nose, Ruby?" "He touched me while I was sleeping," she exclaimed. "He called me one of his prospects, and that he could do whatever he wished with me," she said, repulsed. Amaranth turned back at this, bushy eyebrows raised as he waited for his son's explanation. Prince Garnet looked away and mumbled something Ruby could not hear. "Not all women," said King Amaranth loudly. "Not all women will simply part their legs because of who you are. You were arrogant to presume so. You're lucky a bloody nose was all you got. Women are not objects simply for your pleasure. They have their own wishes and desires. I had hoped you had learned that from your studies. If you have hopes to be king, my son, you'd best learn your entitlement is something that can be taken away at a moment's notice. Now get out. I wish to speak to Ruby alone." "Yes, father," said Prince Garnet, and left promptly, head tilted backwards, followed by the titles. Amaranth closed the door as the last soldier left and said, "I am not surprised by my son's behavior. There are privileges that go along with being heir to the throne that he exploits. I suspect he'll simply find the next door in the corridor," he said, with a humorless laugh. "How can you allow him to behave that way?" said Ruby, appalled. "Such is the nature of the position," said Amaranth, spreading his large hands. "Those who are above us we idolize, do we not? Stars, I recall them being compared to. Who would not do anything to be with a star?" "He is far from someone to idolize, nor someone to be with," said Ruby with a shudder. The king laughed. "Indeed, yet no one really knows a star, do they? They have a sense of mystery and excitement about them. They are also fleeting. It is why people do things when they get close to a star. With our guest staying with us for tonight's occasion, you'll find that my son is being capitalized on. Ruby had forgotten about the event that was being held. These other women, she trailed off and made gagging noises. Oh, yes, and more. They throw themselves at him, quite literally, and are desperate to impress. It does not excuse it, but can you see his behavior more clearly now? Ruby felt disgusted by the prince and the behavior of the other women. But he's so ugly, she said in disbelief. Amaranth laughed. His mother's looks and my temper. He missed out on our two positive attributes and instead got two negatives. Ruby felt no better about what had happened, but allowed her guard to ease in the presence of the king. Was there something you wanted to see me about? She asked. Straightforward as always, replied the king. No doubt your personality will make you accustomed to this evening's event, for you are to dress formally and be at the banquet hall at sunset. For today, though, you are free to roam the palace as you see fit, though you are not permitted to leave. I'm sure you will find sufficient entertainment to occupy yourself with. He inclined his head and made for the door. Thank you, said Ruby before he left. For what? Said the king. The titles. They're about to kill me. Oh, goddess, no. They aren't programmed to kill. Only I have the authority to overrule their programming. My son's pride is easily wounded, explained the king. That exercise was to scare you into submission, Ruby. He's done that before with a few girls who've resisted him. Farewell, for now, he said, closing the door. What a creep, she thought, sitting in the red linen bed. Slowly, she extracted herself from the bed and showered, enjoying the feeling the nanobots provided as it had the night before. She found herself with nothing to wear and was directed by the robotic voice to the three-way dress mirror. There it said, "Think of your style, and it shall be." Ruby thought of a plain t-shirt and jeans combination, to which the robot voice replied, "A relaxed attire. Please hold still." The nanobots emerged from the mirror, but instead of cleaning her, they wove fabric across her body. Plain denim red jeans, a maroon t-shirt with sneakers. "Require any makeup?" asked the voice. Ruby declined, asking only for dry hair and for it to be tied at the back. "Very well," replied the voice, and the nanobots fixed her hair into a long plait with a sparkling clip to hold it in place. "Do you require anything else?" asked the voice. Ruby said no, and thanked it. "Do return before sunset," said the voice somewhat worriedly. "You must dress formally." "I know," replied Ruby. "Don't remind me," and headed out to her room, interested in exploring the palace. As she wandered the hallways, she saw tidal soldiers walking past, all moving with purpose. It had only been a few doors from her room when she heard the sounds of rhythmic thumping and groans of ecstasy coming from the door left ajar ahead of her. She heard huffing and squeals of delight as the rhythmic sound of the bedhead against the wall reverberated. A sense of disgust returned to Ruby. "Does he not have the decency to close the door?" she thought. She marched towards the open door, and intending to slam it shut, was caught by the scene before her. Splayed out on the bed was Prince Garnet naked, while atop him was the most impossibly proportioned woman she had ever seen. Like a woman from an anime show, she had breasts that went down to her bent knees, but did not sag. They were perfectly straight, like rocket ships, with pointed ends. Her waist was no wider than her small head, which gyrated above two fitness ball-sized buttocks. The woman groaned and moaned atop the prince, her proportions jiggling all the while. Flushed with embarrassment for what she was seeing, Ruby quickly closed the door to the scene, finding herself breathing heavily as the sounds continued unabated. Collecting herself, she walked down the corridor, trying her best to forget what she'd seen and heard. She came to an open expanse where the red discs were traveling up and down the floors of the palace. She waited for a disc to stop and quickly got on. A sensation in her mind asked where she wanted to go. Not knowing, she replied, "Somewhere to have breakfast." The disc descended rapidly, Ruby holding her balance as the floors flew by, some with titles all together in rooms, another with some kind of garden, and then what seemed like rows of cafes, to which the disc decelerated and stopped. Ruby set out onto a brick floor, the aesthetic of a Parisian street as shopkeepers had signs and goods displayed through windows. She walked along the path. People with red hair greeted her as she went by. She walked along the path. People with red hair greeted her as she went by, the aromas of freshly baked bread and coffee filling her nostrils. Despite being inside a building, it felt as though the sun was above her head and a soft breeze was blowing. Ruby lifted her eyes up and saw heat lamps from the ceiling, as well as fans that rotated. Though the recreation of what it would be like was there, it still felt fake. Ruby wondered if there were similar streets like this outside the palace. Her hunger got in the way of her curiosity, and she settled on a small wooden cafe that sold a big breakfast, like the one she'd had back home. It tasted exactly the same as well, despite that everything on the plate was red. She washed it down with a tea, brewed with loose leaf, just how she liked it, and realized she had no way of paying. It was a frantic few moments until she realized that Abe had given her credits on her MindLink. She saw the credits were a very long number that the cost of the breakfast seemed insignificant. Enthused by the number of credits, she decided to see what other shopping there was. For if she was to dress formally tonight, she would make sure she had the best outfit, just like at the Prism Music Festival.